Chapter 141, Section 141. It's simple. I need to get control of Norman Osborn and use the Osborn Group's resources to investigate who brought us, Peter Parkers from different universes, into this world. Middle-aged Peter said, his expression grave. Control Norman Osborn? Fire, Peter chuckled. That's a good idea. I support it. Use the Osborn Group's resources? That really is smart. Invisible, Peter nodded. If you need my help with anything, just say the word. The Peter from this universe watched the three of them reach a decision in a few words. He was about to speak when a familiar figure appeared at the main entrance of the Osborn Group building across the street. Wait, is that Norman Osborn? He's not supposed to be able to get out of bed, the universe's Peter said in surprise. Why does he look fine? The other three followed his gaze and saw Norman about to get into a car. It is Norman Osborn, middle-aged Peter said. There must have been a breakthrough in their biomedical research. After a moment's thought, he added, So, do we still need to control him now? Invisible Peter shrugged. Yes, why not? Although Norman Osborn's health has recovered, he's still just a man, middle-aged Peter said. Let's go. Follow him. Before he finished, middle-aged Peter fired a web and shot after the car. The others followed quickly. The Peter from this universe watched them go, stunned. Hey! You're all leaving. What about me? Figure out how to catch up yourself, Invisible Peter called, without looking back. Left behind, the universe's Peter cursed under his breath, then took a running start and leapt toward the building across the street. He latched onto the exterior wall, flipped, and clambered down to the ground. It was past 10. The streets were nearly empty. Pulling up his hood, he ran. No webs? Fine. He'd run. At his pace, he wouldn't be much slower than Norman's car. At a red light, Norman's car halted. From the back seat, Norman turned and glanced up. Among the surrounding skyscrapers, three figures were swinging toward them. He frowned, then smiled. I see. I'm not the only one who inexplicably ended up in this world. He was an old fox. It only took him a moment to understand. These three trailing him were also strangers here. Interesting, he murmured. What do you want? The light turned green. The driver hit the gas, and the car moved on. The three Spider-Men trailed behind, neither gaining ground nor being shaken off. Down on the street, the hooded figure kept pace, running along the roadside, guided by the others overhead. Half an hour later, the car slowed and turned into the driveway of a Long Island villa. The iron gates opened, and the car rolled onto the estate. Norman's villa was far larger than Xiao Ran's, a true mansion worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The road from the gate to the house stretched nearly 200 meters, lined with ancient transplanted trees from around the world. The trees formed a natural screen that almost completely enveloped the estate. Privacy was absolute. The car stopped at the Fountain Plaza. The driver climbed out to open Norman's door. Sir, I'll head back now. I'll pick you up early for the company tomorrow. He had been Norman's driver for nearly 30 years and knew his boss's peculiar habits. The villa was staffed during the day, but at night only the butler remained. Other servants lived nearby in a smaller house. Since Norman's illness had worsened, he'd become even more eccentric, but the driver still obeyed. Go, Norman said without looking, and walked toward the villa. At the entrance, the old butler Sean stood with graying hair, waiting respectfully. Norman stopped. Sean, you may go and rest. Yes, sir. Sean nodded and left without asking why Norman hadn't gone inside. He had served the Osborns his whole life and knew better than to question orders. Once the butler was gone, Norman returned to the Fountain Plaza and looked toward the patch of woods. Come out, he called. You followed me all this way. Aren't you going to come meet me? A black figure dropped from a tree and landed a few meters away. A moment later, a Spider-Man in a fiery red suit appeared beside him. Are you sure this is Norman Osborn? A voice asked from the other side. As the air shifted, another figure stepped forward and joined the group. It is Norman, middle-aged Peter said confidently. From behind, the late-arriving Peter finally ran up, out of breath. I'm not too late, am I? Brother, this won't do. Invisible Peter laughed, putting an arm around him. You should at least get a costume like ours. You're lowering the standards for Peter Parkers. The universe's Peter pushed him off, annoyed, then realized to his irritation that he couldn't budge him. Invisible Peter smiled, already suspecting that this world's Peter had only recently gained his powers. The way his strength lagged behind the others suggested a fresh origin. Norman's gaze swept over the four of them. "So, you're from other universes as well?" All four of them looked at him, surprised. Peter blurted, "You're Norman Osborn, right?" Norman nodded. "How do you know we're from other universes?" Before Norman could answer, middle-aged Peter spoke. "Because he's not this universe's Norman Osborn." Norman smiled and nodded in agreement. "Exactly. I'm a Norman Osborn from another universe, but I am, somehow, this world's Norman Osborn now." "What happened to the original Norman Osborn?" Peter couldn't help asking. "Dead." "Fire," Peter snorted. "Looks like the Norman in front of us killed another version of himself and took his place." Peter's face registered sudden realization. He glanced warily at Invisible Peter beside him. "Hey, your stare's kind of rude," Invisible Peter complained. Invisible Peter noticed and bristled. "Come on, are you overthinking this? Norman Osborn has an entire Osborn group backing him. What do you have?" Peter forced an apologetic smile, but didn't let his guard down. He was just a normal Parker here, but at least he had a legal, legitimate identity in this world. The other three? They didn't even have a driver's license. They were completely unregistered. You had to be careful around people like Norman. Villains lie. Anyone who trusts them is a fool. Fair enough. Norman didn't try to hide what he'd done. He smiled at the four of them. "Now that you've met me, how about introductions?" "We're all called Peter Parker," Invisible Peter said, jabbing a thumb at the local Peter. "Except for this guy, the three of us were inexplicably pulled in from other universes." "Interesting." A strange glint flashed in Norman's eyes. An old fox remained an old fox. Years taught cunning. Who could guess what such a man was really thinking? "We came because we want to use the Osborn Group's resources to figure out why we've been brought here," middle-aged Peter said. "Originally, we thought about controlling the original Norman Osborn, but that seems unnecessary now." "Oh? You think I'll help you?" Norman smiled at middle-aged Peter. Of the four Peters, middle-aged Peter was the sharpest. Fire Peter had a cocky edge, but seemed petty in his cunning. Invisible Peter was ordinary, smart perhaps, but not learned. The local Peter looked the weakest of all, nothing in him that suggested threat. Norman could crush him like an ant. "So, why would I need people like you?" he asked, looking down at his right hand. "To be blunt, what can you offer me?" Fire Peter stepped forward, and with a sweep of his arm, a ball of flame wrapped his right hand. "Look, old man, don't get the wrong idea. We're not here to bargain." "Temper your temper, young man." Norman regarded the flame with mild interest. "Powerful, but the temperature is too low." "Not hot enough?" Fire Peter sneered. "This should be more than enough to burn you to death." "Try it then," Norman said, amused. Fire Peter's smirk hardened. He unleashed everything, an all-consuming inferno that instantly swallowed Norman. Instead of screams or panic, Norman looked blissful, eyes closed. "It's been a long time since I tasted something like this," he murmured. Fire Peter stared in disbelief. The others watched in stunned silence. Norman bathed in raging fire, yet apparently unharmed. Then Norman opened his eyes. In the next instant, Fire Peter, who'd been standing a moment before, cowed on one knee, howling, "Help me! Save me!" The other three Peters recoiled, instinct forcing them farther away. This was absurd. Middle-aged Peter couldn't even begin to understand what Norman had done. "Bastards!" Fire Peter spat, furious at being abandoned. But before he could finish, his body began to shrivel visibly, skin tightening and cracking. In seconds, he looked like a desiccated mummy. With a deafening boom, he exploded into a blinding sphere of flame. Norman inhaled deliberately. The burst of fire, and even the flames still licking his body, were drawn into him. He exhaled, clearly savoring it. "Exquisite," he said, eyes gleaming. "A flavor beyond ordinary comparison." He opened his eyes and surveyed the remaining three. "Kneel," he said softly, "and proclaim me your king." Osborn Manor, first floor living room. The three Peters sat in a heavy silence, expressions tangled with humiliation. Moments ago, they had been forced down to their knees and made to kiss Norman's shoes. There had been no choice. Refusal meant death. Norman's devourer ability was almost impossible to escape. Even turning invisible wouldn't save Invisible Peter. Footsteps sounded, and the old butler Sean appeared and announced, "The master wishes to see you." He bowed and left them to follow. They were led down to a secret room in the villa's basement, a vault the old Norman had built. The room held Osborne-developed weaponry, and at its center, behind a glass case, the Green Goblin suit gleamed. Norman stood before it, admiring his creation. "Take a look," he said when they entered. "This is what old Norman labored to build for years." "The Green Goblin suit," Norman added, turning to the three. "Good taste, or at least mine. A pity the old Norman never had the luck to use it." None of the three Peters felt inclined to praise the suit. Good taste, they thought. That opinion probably only appealed to Norman Osborn. Unnoticed, two others had slipped into the room with them. Norman and the three Peters didn't seem to notice at all. "Why can't he see us?" Gwen whispered, waving a hand in front of Norman's face. There was no change. Norman's eyes remained blank. "Just a simple mental cloak," Xiao Ran said with a faint smile. She extended a finger and gently tapped Norman's forehead. It was an easy move against ordinary minds, but in Xiao Ran's perception, Norman's mental strength wasn't merely ordinary, it was chaotic. Chapter 143, Section 143. For some reason, his mental power felt wildly chaotic, like a jumble of different drinks, oils, nuts, and a dozen other things mixed together. It was a mess. Ding, a prompt flickered. "Do you want to extract the character entry for Norman Osborn? It is detected that the target character Norman Osborn has multiple character entries. Please choose one to extract." Swish, a list unfolded before his eyes. Traveler. You once experienced time travel, possibly the most precious memory of your life. You also possess Spider-Man's abilities but failed to be a good neighbor in New York. Everyone dislikes you, even despises and hates you. Shouldn't you reflect on this? The mutated spider genes and the genetic disease genes in your body produced a strange reaction. You gained the ability to devour others' vitality and some of their power. Be careful. Devouring too much may cause your mind to become extremely chaotic. Master. You once mastered a world, but you have since abandoned it. Xiao Ran stared at the 4 entries the system offered for Norman Osborn. They weren't what he'd expected. 3 of them were basically resume tags, the sorts of personality labels anyone might have, like honest person, black-hearted boss, or internet addict teenager. They were worthless on their own. If he insisted, he could extract them, but they added no real value. The Devourer entry, though, was what had caught his attention earlier. When he first encountered this Norman, he'd noted the man's muscle density was off the charts, thousands of times denser than other Spider-Men, and that had intrigued him. But now he discovered the catch. Norman gained that strength by devouring other humans. Xiao Ran wasn't squeamish about methods, as long as the power was worth it, but the entry warned of severe side effects. The side effects weren't minor. If abused, the ability could cause a split personality, like the original Norman. Just imagining 2 minds fighting over one body made Xiao Ran's scalp prickle. That alone made the entry risky. The entry's effects also looked underwhelming on the surface. The devouring could take others' vitality and some fraction of their power. Vitality mainly meant lifespan and could be used for healing. That wasn't very useful to Xiao Ran. His Kryptonian bloodline effectively negated any lifespan limit. He could stay 17 for 100 years, 1,000,000 years, an immortal-like bug. As for healing, he already had an undying body. Deadpool's immortality was a better analog, so the vitality part was redundant. What about the power-stealing aspect? Potentially useful. The problem was, how big a slice of the target's power would he steal? Half? A tenth? 1%? Even 1% would be acceptable if it scaled, but it looped back to the same worry. Devour too much and risk mental collapse. If he limited himself to small gains, the effect might be negligible. Xiao Ran ran a quick mental example. Suppose an ordinary person's strength equaled 50 kilograms, and devouring them yielded half of that, 25 kilograms. Xiao Ran's daily sunbasking could increase his power by 20,000 tons. How many ordinary people would he have to devour to equal that? The math came out to 800,000 people. 800,000, an absurd number, and certainly too much to avoid the side effects. So devouring ordinary people wasn't cost-effective and would likely drive him to madness. Maybe the strategy was different. Target powerful individuals. Devouring someone like Norman or Superman Peter could be worth millions or even billions of ordinary people. That sounded promising, except Norman himself probably didn't have enough powerful victims available in his world. After he consumed the few superheroes there, he'd be reduced to gobbling ordinary people, which explained why Norman's mind had become so chaotic in the first place. He'd already devoured far too many weak targets and driven himself insane, maybe without even realizing it. For Xiao Ran, though, the entry suddenly looked like a perfect fit. He could travel through countless American comic worlds where powerful beings abounded. He wouldn't need to prey on ordinary people at all. He could devour only top-tier targets and avoid triggering the side effects. Still, he hesitated. How many people until the mind breaks, he thought. To trigger mental derangement, you'd need to devour at least tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. If I keep it under 10,000, it should be safe. At first, he'd been disappointed by the entry, but after thinking it through, he realized it suited his situation very well. He considered it for a few seconds and then decided to extract it. He still had 2 extraction opportunities left. One of them was being saved for the mastermind, so he couldn't use that now, but the other he could. Besides, he could always come back to this world after clearing it. Clearing the game would grant him at least 2 more extraction opportunities. Chapter 144, Section 144, Why at least? Because Xiao Ran wasn't sure he could trigger the hidden achievements conditions. If he could, it wouldn't be a one-off. System, extract the Devourer entry, he mouthed silently. Ding, extraction successful. The entry landed in his character panel and revealed more detail. Xiao Ran wanted to know the exact devouring ratio. Was it half? 1%? Less? What shocked him was how high the ratio actually was. It far exceeded his worst guess. There was more good news. The Devourer entry's side effect seemed largely offset by his telepathy ability. Telepathy is a psychic power that links to other minds, reads memories, and senses thoughts. Seeing too many memories can cause mental disorientation, but established telepaths like Professor X don't go mad because telepathy itself shields against that risk. The Devourer's side effect behaves similarly. It's not a perfect shield, but it suppresses almost all of it, about 99.9%. The stronger a person's mental power, the higher the threshold before the Devourer's side effects manifest. Norman, whose mental power was only slightly above normal, would have a very low threshold, probably in the hundreds of thousands. He had devoured nearly 1 billion people to reach his current strength. 1 billion. No wonder his mind was utterly shattered. Xiao Ran suspected Norman's original personality had been overwhelmed by something far more violent, chaotic, and terrifying. Xiao Ran did a quick estimate. With his current mental power, the threshold before mental confusion would kick in was at least tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions. Conservatively, assume tens of millions. Add the telepathy weakening, a 1,000-fold reduction, and the effective threshold becomes tens of billions. In short, unless he deliberately ate tens of billions of lives, he wouldn't trigger the Devourer entry's dangerous side effects. Who in their right mind devours tens of billions of people? What kind of ultimate demon king is that? Xiao Ran laughed to himself. For practical purposes, he could ignore the side effect. His mental power would only keep growing, and that conservative base would climb into the hundreds of billions. Only a complete loss of reason and the devouring of all life in the universe would push him into danger. Having extracted Norman's Devourer entry put him in a good mood. So when Norman and the 3 Peters began plotting, Xiao Ran didn't leap out to eliminate them. He decided to watch and let them make a scene. If they stirred up enough trouble, the mastermind behind them would have to reveal themselves. He left Osborne Mansion with Gwen and returned to his villa on Long Island. He wasn't in a rush to go back to Zongmen World. Instead, he waited quietly, letting events unfold. With nothing pressing, he went into space to bask in the sun and train. Even a modest gain each day adds up. He avoided testing the Devourer ability for now. His ultimate target was Norman, but Norman still had uses, so there was no hurry. 5 days later, after a few sessions of sunbathing, Xiao Ran had increased his strength by a little over 6 tons. He had also been monitoring Norman and the assembled Spider-Men. Norman's force had grown to 6 Spider-Men from other universes, plus 1 Peter from this universe, 6 subordinates, which, together with Norman, made the Evil 7. Norman was the leader. Aside from the three Peters, the other three members were a dark-skinned female Peter who excelled at nighttime stealth and enjoyed inflicting pain, a venom spider named Eddie Brock, and a terrifying real spider, Peter. The female Peter was a supervillain in her own world, cruel and sadistic. Eddie Brock had been a reporter who, after being bitten by a genetically modified spider during an interview with the Osborn group, gained spider powers and later bonded with the alien symbiote Venom. He used his new powers to kill those he resented and became a notorious criminal. The last Peter had once been a bullied, small-framed student who was bitten during an off-campus activity. Unlike other Spider-Men, he fused so completely with the spider's genes that his body permanently transformed. He became a giant spider with a human face and went on a rampage in his world, prompting the U.S. to send troops to try to contain him. Norman's Evil Seven was assembled, and the stage was set. Xiao Ran settled back to watch the chaos unfold, confident that whatever came would only make things clearer and perhaps bring the true mastermind into the open. Peter was cunning. He never struck out in the open. He appeared only in places with huge crowds, forcing the military to hesitate before using high-powered destructive weapons. At other times, he disappeared down the city's developed underground piping, where even the Eagle Nation's forces had a hard time tracking him. With no superheroes native to Venom Spider's world to check him, he acted with near-total impunity. He was a full-blown supervillain. And when a group of supervillains gathered, what did they do? Cause destruction. In the 5 days since they'd gone public, New York had descended into chaos. A bank robbed in the morning, a plaza murder in the afternoon. By the end of the week, the city was a wreck. But where villains ran rampant, heroes inevitably rose to oppose them. Several Spider-Men from other universes, led by Superman Peter, stepped in and engaged the villains in epic clashes across the city. Still, the Evil Seven maintained the upper hand. Superman Peter couldn't overcome Norman. The gap was staggering. 30 million tons of strength against 7 million tons was an overwhelming mismatch. Without help, Superman Peter would have been crushed. In the chaos, Xiao Ran took advantage of the battles to tick off several victories toward a clearance achievement, defeating several Spider-Men in the process. On the villain's side, aside from Norman, the other 6 members of the Evil Seven had all been beaten by Xiao Ran. On the hero's side, besides Superman Peter, there were a handful of notable allies. Colonel Rhodes was one. He was his world's Spider-Man, a military officer who'd been bitten by a genetic spider while visiting the Osborn group to inspect weapons testing. He'd gained spider-like powers and committed himself to serving the military, fighting terrorists abroad. From the Eagle Nation's perspective, he was at least a sanctioned, if unconventional, hero. There was also Robot Spider-Man. His planet was dominated by silicon-based life forms, something like Cybertron, and his name, like so many others, was Peter Parker. A civilian model robot who'd worked for the Osborn group, he'd become infected with a spider virus and awakened spider abilities, instantly leaping to the status of the strongest robot on his world. His strength topped 1,000 tons. He and Venom Spider had once fought to a standstill. Giant Spider-Man was another. His real name was Flash Thompson, once Peter Parker's school tormentor, but in this universe a loyal friend. During a field trip, he helped Peter take photos and was bitten by a huge genetic spider. His baseline strength was under 10 tons, and his movements were somewhat simian in nature, but he could transform into a 12-meter giant with an astonishing 3,000 tons of strength. He lacked flexibility, but raw power made up for it. Giant Spider-Man had recently clashed with the Evil Spider, a monstrous villain nearly 3 meters tall with an 8-meter leg span. The Evil Spider's strength couldn't match Giant Spider-Man's, but its webs were both exceptional in toughness and laced with poison. Giant Spider-Man nearly died in that fight and was saved only by the timely arrival of his teammates. Harry, the masked vigilante once active in Hell's Kitchen, had joined Superman Peter's side as well. Nominally Norman's son, Harry knew the truth. This Norman was not his father, but his father's murderer. Despite his fraught history with the original Norman, Harry had sworn to avenge his father. All told, only 5 Spider-Men stood with the righteous faction, while the villainous side fielded 7. Norman's superiority made the odds even bleaker. Yet Xiao Ran noticed something odd. The ice-powered Spider-Man who'd appeared at the very beginning hadn't been seen since his first appearance. Xiao Ran had already completed 13 of the 15 Spider-Man defeats required for the clearance achievement. Only 3 remained: Norman, Superman Peter, and the Ice Spider-Man. Why were there 16 Spider-Men in all? The system had said 15. It should be exact. It shouldn't allow one to be substituted for another if one was too strong. In short, there was one extra. Coupled with the fact that the Ice Spider-Man had disappeared immediately after his first appearance, Xiao Ran suspected he might be the mastermind behind the outbreak, or at least connected to the mastermind. The last time they'd fought, the Ice Spider-Man had been injured. Was that all the mastermind's strength? Was he hiding his true power? The more Xiao Ran thought about it, the more convinced he became. He couldn't find the Ice Spider-Man's hiding place now, but he was 80 to 90% sure that the missing spider was involved. He resolved he wouldn't let the man hide forever. It was Sunday, around 9 a.m. Schools and businesses were closed. A weary city looked to relax after a long week. But Times Square was the scene of a grand parade. Not a celebration, but a protest. With crime surging and supercriminals running unchecked, citizens flooded the streets carrying signs and chanting against government inaction. The Eagle Nation's leaders were in a bind. These weren't ordinary criminals, but superhuman threats. Norman had even sent a seemingly friendly letter to the president. It had been placed on the president's pillow. The delivery had unnerved the commander-in-chief so much that he immediately increased his personal security tenfold and still felt exposed. If the villains could leave a message by his bed, what was to stop them from striking in the night? Deploying the army offered little comfort. These supercriminals appeared only when crimes were committed. By the time the military arrived, the villains were gone. The NYPD's firearms and tactics were useless against non-human foes with cataclysmic strength. That morning's unrest had the officials helpless, until they remembered that along with the supervillains, some superheroes had also appeared. These new heroes possessed non-human strength, and one of them had abilities reminiscent of the comics Superman. That didn't erase the danger. Superpowered individuals were inherently unstable, but it did offer a sliver of relief. The city wasn't completely defenseless. Supervillains and superheroes were natural enemies. Let them tear each other apart for now. If both sides got badly hurt, or better yet, wiped out, that would be fine. As for the protest? This was America. Protests happened all the time. Let people make a scene. At worst, some stores would shut down for a day. How much harm could it do? Among the protesters, a man in a baseball cap watched the crowd, listening to his earpiece. No sign of the Evil Seven yet, Peter. Are you sure they're staging something here today? He asked. I overheard their plans. They're coming, Superman Peter replied. Perched on a rooftop, Superman Peter's red cape snapped in the wind as he surveyed the streets below. He wanted to evacuate the crowd, but knew it wouldn't be that simple. Why do they always have to flirt with death? He muttered. No matter which world he came from, people never seemed to learn from bloody lessons. Being a superhero left him drained. Rhodes, what's your status? He called. At a corner cafe, Rhodes lifted his coffee and scanned the street. Nothing. They could be underground. Impossible, Rhodes said. My vision can peer through pavement. There's nothing down there. Machine Peter, you see anything? Superman Peter asked. Machine Peter, posing as a street performer at a nearby intersection, replied through his built-in comm. No sign yet. I'm swamped by kids, though. Machine Peter felt oddly uneasy around this swarm of small carbon-based life forms. Keep monitoring. Don't miss anything, Superman Peter ordered. No sooner had he spoken than screams cut through the air. The road split with a thunderous crack, and a colossal human-faced spider tore up from the asphalt. Thompson, still on the line, went silent for a beat. I said they'd come from underground, he said sheepishly. He hadn't seen them in time, unless the enemy had shielded themselves with lead, exploiting a weakness Superman Peter hadn't accounted for. Focus on getting people to safety, Superman Peter barked. Already on it, Thompson snapped. He ripped off his earpiece and, with a roar, tore open his shirt to reveal a golden-red Spider-Man suit underneath. In an instant, he ballooned to a towering 12 meters. Clear the area. Move now. His enormous voice drowned out the panic. A child pointed with awe, but the adults only wanted to run. Thompson launched himself at the monstrous spider, roaring as he charged. Something moved at his back. Invisible Peter materialized, hurled a small device at Thompson's waist, and it clung there, red light blinking. Thompson barely had time to register it before it detonated. The explosion sent the 12-meter man slamming into a nearby building. Rhodes, wearing a white Spider-Man mask, whipped out a web and shot himself toward Invisible Peter. At another corner, Machine Peter ignited jets in his boots, rocketing skyward and delivering a flaming descending punch that sent the human-faced spider tumbling across the street. A new threat dropped from the shadows. A 3-meter venomized spider leapt and knocked Machine Peter aside, roaring as it chewed off an unlucky bystander's head. "Delicious," it snarled, then barreled toward the recovering Machine Peter. On another front, Harry faced a Peter who looked like his friend. "You imposter killed my father," Harry spat. "You're my best friend, so why are you defending him?" Peter ducked Harry's blows with a bitter smile. Then a black-clad figure came at Harry and kicked him away. Middle-aged Peter turned to the newcomer. "Can you handle this?" "I can," the man replied. "Good, I'll go help the boss." Middle-aged Peter flicked a web and shot toward the thick of it. The force of the battle blew out a wall, and Harry burst through, roaring, "Peter, get out of my way! I don't want to kill you!" He unleashed blow after blow, each one carrying the force of tons. "Harry, stop," Peter pleaded. "You can't beat him. You'll die if you keep going. Please, give up." But Harry refused. He channeled monstrous strength. Peter was already outmatched. He'd only had Spider-Man's powers for a short time and couldn't match the other, more experienced Spider-Men. High above, under the blazing sun, a lone figure hovered with his back to the light. A black cape snapped at his shoulders, and beneath a dark Krypton battlesuit, his muscles were carved and taut. Xiao Ran watched the chaos below without rushing to intervene. Both sides had shown themselves. The hidden orchestrator ought to be compelled to act soon. He scanned the scene inch by inch, but couldn't locate the mastermind. "Like a rat in the gutter," he murmured with a small, cynical smile, and he continued to watch. On the street, the battle had nearly erupted into all-out war. Norman Osborn, immaculately dressed in a sharp suit, stepped out of a building. Survivors fleeing past him disintegrated into dust before they could scream. Superman Peter's eyes burned with fury. "Norman, whatever you're planning, I'll stop you," he called and dove down, unleashing a scorching blast of heat vision. Norman looked up, sneered, and raised a hand. He absorbed the beam with a casual motion, as if drinking it in. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said. "Energy means nothing to me." Norman's power let him absorb and nullify energy attacks. Superman Peter's heat vision fizzled uselessly against him. Only physical force seemed to give Norman trouble, and that, as far as Norman was concerned, was a small inconvenience. Chapter 147, Section 147. "Norman, stop it. Don't you want to go back to your own world?" Superman Peter roared. "Return?" Norman sneered. "Who told you I want to return?" He spread his arms and smiled. "This world is my new home. I'm going to remake it in my image." "Madman, I won't let you succeed," Superman Peter bellowed. "Just you?" Norman laughed, looking down on him. "You still haven't learned your lesson. You superheroes never learn." No sooner had he finished speaking than Norman teleported in front of Superman Peter and delivered a rocket-like headbutt that sent him flying. Bang! Norman landed lightly, smoothed his disheveled hair, and smiled up at the sky. Superman Peter streaked away at supersonic speed until he finally stopped almost 100 kilometers out. He bore a painful expression. Norman's blow had broken several ribs, collapsed his chest, and nearly crushed his heart. Fortunately, like the Superman he resembled, Peter could absorb solar radiation to heal. Basking in sunlight, his injuries quickly began to mend. "Norman's strength is several times mine. Luckily, he can't fly. If he could, I wouldn't even be able to get away," Superman Peter thought, fear lingering in his chest. Even knowing he was outmatched, he refused to back down. Even at the cost of his own life, he would stop Norman's rampage. A white streak flashed across the sky as Superman Peter dove back toward the city at several hundred times the speed of sound. In Times Square, the Evil Seven had the situation tightly under control. The handful of other heroes facing them were no match. Giant Thompson sat clutching his midsection. Robot Peter's leg had been torn off, and sparks flew from the jagged stump. Not far away, Rode was barely holding off Invisible Peter and middle-aged Peter, who were clearly toying with him rather than fighting seriously. "Enough," Norman said, approaching in the guise of an elderly gentleman. He spoke to the two Peters who were still feigning a fight. The next instant, bang, a figure was hurled through a building wall and buried beneath rubble. Middle-aged Peter retracted a leg through the debris, landed before Norman, and asked, "Mr. Osborne, what should we do next?" "Start here, with New York. Take the city, then slowly consume the whole country," Norman said with chilling confidence. "Right, Mr. Osborne," middle-aged Peter answered. He wasn't particularly interested in ruling, but Norman's power was overwhelming, and he still hoped Norman could find a way to send them home. So he complied. "Norman," a voice from above, then a blur of motion. A figure struck the ground at terrifying speed and slammed into Norman. Boom! The earth cracked, white blast clouds shot up, and a shockwave swept through the air like a tidal surge, folding a milky vapor over the city as if a giant white pot had been overturned across the skyline. Buildings near the impact imploded in sections. Windows shattered for kilometers. Countless people clutched their ears or bled from their mouths and noses. Those closest were torn apart. The death toll jumped into 5 digits in an instant. Even with the Evil Seven's prior destruction over recent days, fatalities had remained under 4 digits. This single, enraged strike multiplied the carnage beyond imagination. Middle-aged Peter, nearest the blast, was hurled away. Even through his spider suit, which absorbed some of the force, his organs were pulverized. He had hoped Norman would find a way home. He never expected such a grotesque, abrupt end. Minutes later, the aftershocks subsided. Times Square had become a crater several hundred meters across. Within a kilometer, most buildings lay in ruin. A heap of rubble slipped, and a massive Thompson rolled and slammed down, ejecting Robot Peter beneath him. Robot Peter, protected by Thompson's timely intervention, crawled from the wreckage, sparking and shorting, his remaining left leg hopping uselessly as he tried to escape. Terror overwhelmed him. This world was too dangerous. He only wanted out. Something made him look back. Before he could make sense of it, his vision went black and he lost consciousness. A figure flew backward, cutting a straight path nearly 2 kilometers before crashing through a stadium and coming to rest. Superman Peter, eyes bloodshot, crawled up from the shattered ground. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" he snarled, rage warping his face. He pushed off with both hands, whipping up a gale, and in a heartbeat covered 2 kilometers back to the smoking ruins of Times Square. At the rim of the crater stood Norman, clothes torn, breathing hard. His eyes were red and white steam curled up from his back. Superman Peter lunged like a wild animal. "I'll kill you," he roared, swinging a fist. Norman caught the blow with one hand, then grinned and threw him, slamming him onto the ground again and again. Boom, boom. Superman Peter lost count of how many times he was slammed down. A madness flared in his chest, burning away pain and restraint. He broke Norman's grip, stopped midair as if slamming on invisible brakes, and attacked again. They became 2 furious beasts, tearing at each other across the ruined city. Norman's strength outmatched Superman Peter's, so Peter bore the brunt of the punishment, but under the sun, each serious injury healed in seconds. He'd take a dozen bone-crushing hits and still launch himself right back to strike. Norman, by contrast, had to consume his life force to recover. After several exchanges, his face showed bruises and a smear of blood at his mouth. He no longer resembled the composed old gentleman. He looked like a rabid dog. Are these two insane? Xiao Ran looked down from nearly 20,000 meters above the ground, frowning at the scene. At first, the fight had seemed contained, but now it had become a desperate, reckless brawl, as if nothing else in the world mattered. No, this isn't right, he realized. Superman Peter was supposed to be a hero. He wouldn't blindly fight in such a densely populated area. Something had to be wrong. Had the mastermind done something? Was it Ice Peter? He didn't know, but if the mastermind had acted, they should be revealing themselves soon. Several fighter jets streaked toward the city from the distant horizon. Xiao Ran barely glanced at them. At his altitude, normal weapons felt futile. No missile would stop these two superpowered beings. The jets swept over the crater and released 5 powerful aerial bombs. They plummeted toward Norman and Superman Peter and detonated about 100 meters above the ground. Boom, boom. The concussions rolled through the city. Even those sheltering in air raid bunkers heard the explosions reverberate overhead. Inside a military base, a general stared intently at the drone feed. Is he dead? Everyone in the command center had been waiting eagerly to see those 2 monsters finally smashed to pieces. But the footage showed something else. 2 figures stepped out of the inferno one after the other, completely unharmed, and resumed their brutal fight. How is this possible? The general bellowed, slamming his fist on the table as his blood pressure spiked with anger. General, what do we do? Are we really going to drop a nuclear bomb on New York? An Air Force colonel asked. Using a nuclear weapon on their own soil, on their own people, would be recorded in history forever. Connect me to the Pentagon. If there's no other way, the general said in a low voice. They just hoped the bomb would work. At 20,000 meters up, Xiao Ran's gaze snapped toward the sea approaching New York. Giant waves surged as something enormous rose from the water. A mech was stepping out of the ocean, one heavy footfall at a time, until it stood in New York Harbor, 100 meters tall, its blue and white armor glittering in the sun. It was breathtaking. Xiao Ran was smitten the moment he saw it. What man didn't love mechs, especially one that big and elegant? He noticed, however, a section of the mech's chest had been shielded with a layer of lead, opaque, blocking any view. Was that to hide the pilot from him? From Superman Peter? It seemed unnecessary. With a mech that size, anyone could probably see the cockpit. The mech began charging. A massive energy cannon in its chest blazed into a searing white, locking onto Norman and Superman Peter, still locked in a bloodthirsty rage and paying no attention to the new arrival. No, that's my prey, Xiao Ran decided. He didn't intend to just watch 2 predators fight. In an instant, he dove. 20,000 meters was nothing for him. He swooped down, grabbed Norman with one hand and Superman Peter with the other, and shot back up into the sky. A moment later, whoosh, a blistering white beam, over 10 meters across, slammed into the spot they had just vacated. There was no explosion, but the ground at the impact point collapsed into a sloping, crystallized shaft over 10 meters wide. The earth around it had been crystallized. Its depth was unknown. That weapon is powerful, Xiao Ran murmured, impressed. He looked down at the 2 men in his grip. Under the push of his mental power, their bloodshot, ferocious eyes were fixed, but their hands had frozen. Useless now, he thought. He examined Norman first, still snarling, about to lunge, then activated his Devour ability. Instantly, a massive force surged from Norman into Xiao Ran. A strange sensation rose in Xiao Ran's chest. Hard to describe, but not unpleasant. Norman's body visibly withered. Within a minute or 2, he had shriveled into something like a mummy. With a single pop, his body exploded, like fireworks, and the remains turned into a wisp of green gas that Xiao Ran swallowed in one gulp. Xiao Ran opened his character panel. His strength had jumped by 18 million tons. His speed had only increased slightly. Norman's speed had been a bit slower than Superman Peter's, so Xiao Ran's speed rose by about Mach 200. His new stats read, strength 80.112 million tons, speed Mach 32.6, about 1,090 kilometers per second. Not bad, he said, nodding in satisfaction. He turned his attention to Superman Peter, still in that raving state. Xiao Ran slapped him once hard. The sharp smack landed on a ferocious face that went blank for a beat. Still not awake? Xiao Ran muttered, and slapped him again. Slap, slap, slap. His hand became a blur, striking from left to right until he lost count. Stop! Superman Peter suddenly shouted. Xiao Ran's palm froze against his swollen cheek. I've recovered. Don't hit me anymore. Superman Peter blubbered, his voice wobbling. Really? Xiao Ran asked, suspicious. Really? Truer than true gold? Superman Peter nodded fervently, eyes wide and earnest. He had seen the brief trace of regret in Xiao Ran's voice. He had been enjoying that beating, and was eager to get away before another onslaught landed. He put distance between himself and Xiao Ran as fast as he could. He hadn't taken this many slaps in his entire life combined. His face looked like the rest of his head had turned into a pig's. Fortunately, sunlight washed over him and the bruises faded. His puffed face smoothed back to normal. Superman Peter touched his cheek. still feeling a faint sting, though the pain was already much less. Did you suffer some kind of psychological break? What was wrong with you just now? Xiao Ran asked. Peter Parker, the man everyone had been calling Superman Peter, stared down at the ruined New York below, eyes full of pain and guilt. At first I was just irritable, he said. Then my head went blank. I wanted to destroy everything in front of me. He looked at Xiao Ran, anguished. Did I kill a lot of people? Xiao Ran nodded. Yeah, tens of thousands, maybe more. Peter went silent, then sagged as if the wind had gone out of him. I'm a sinner, he croaked, lifting his face to the sky and letting out a raw, painful sound. He sounded utterly defeated. You should have killed me back there. You still can, Xiao Ran said, raising his arm. Peter flinched and covered his cheeks, bracing for a slap. Nothing came. Xiao Ran was smiling, hand lowered. Instinctive reaction, he said. Don't be so theatrical. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and think about how to make amends. I'll go check something over there, Xiao Ran added, and with that he flew toward the giant mech. The mech at the coast had been motionless after one strike. When Xiao Ran approached, it suddenly swung an arm and ejected two long blades, slashing at him. Too slow, Xiao Ran muttered, unimpressed. He didn't bother evading, he simply flew through the metallic blade. The weapon was many times larger than he was, and his body passed through the mech's arm as if it were empty space. He slid straight into the chest cavity and into the cockpit where sight and sound were muffled by electronics. In the center of the cockpit stood a milky white cylindrical object, like a hibernation pod. Xiao Ran walked up and peered through its transparent front. There was nothing inside. So the self-destruction had been a distraction, an obvious attack to draw attention while the real operation moved elsewhere. Find one place, strike another. These foreigners and their strategies. Xiao Ran stepped out and scanned the ruined streets. He locked onto a figure and shot toward it. On a broken city street, a familiar man crouched by a limp body. He slapped the corpse's chest. The deadly black Spider-Man suit shrank and folded into a tiny badge that dangled on a chain around the corpse's neck. The corpse itself was blood-stained and floppy, all but limp. The man pulled a knife in his other hand, severed the corpse's head, and tossed it into a device full of light blue liquid. He repeated the motion with another corpse. This one wore the classic red and blue Spider-Man suit, torn and filthy but with the head still intact. He needed heads. He cut the head clean off and dropped it in the tank. He worked methodically until he had collected 7 heads. One head, the Spider-Peter's, had its brain removed directly. The others had been decapitated and submerged in the liquid. Standing back, the man smiled at his overflowing collection. As planned, mission accomplished. He hauled the device and turned to leave, and froze when someone blocked his path. So it really is you. Xiao Ran recognized him immediately. The man wore blue and white armor now, but the face and the cold precision were familiar. This was the Spider-Man who wielded ice. I didn't expect you to arrive so soon, the man said, looking toward the giant mech in the distance. I thought those two and this mech would at least slow you down long enough for me to get out of this universe. Xiao Ran gestured to the device of floating heads. Why collect their heads? Is that your goal here, or are you only here for these things? Peter's face went serious. I'm sorry for the damage I caused to your world, but I'm not a hero who cares about ordinary lives. He said it plainly. I'm not that kind of person. Xiao Ran didn't deny it. He'd already seen the evidence. Selfless sacrifice wasn't this man's style. Like when Xiao Ran had faced Muzan at the Demon Slayer Corps' headquarters, he hadn't been trying to save anyone. He'd acted because he'd been provoked. Then we don't have to be enemies, Peter went on. I was only passing through. I've got what I came for, and I'll leave this place. To apologize, I'll even give you that mech as compensation, Peter added, surprising even himself with the offer. If there's anything else you want, tell me. If I can, I'll give it to you. Xiao Ran didn't answer immediately. He asked instead the question that had been nagging him. Why are you doing all this? You didn't come here yesterday. You've been here a while, haven't you? You couldn't have hidden that giant mech without prior planning. Peter nodded. I've been in your universe for years. I spent those years repairing my machine. A little while ago, I finally fixed it. So you used it to pull Spider-Men from other universes into this one? Xiao Ran asked. Exactly, Peter said. I need them. I can't keep hopping between universes like a headless chicken, relying on luck. You're looking for someone, Xiao Ran said, piecing things together. Peter's expression softened, almost painfully so. She's the love of my life. I can't lose her. I have to find MJ. So he'd built a machine to travel between universes in search of his lost girlfriend. Xiao Ran couldn't help the bitter humor in his voice. Kingpin had once destroyed a city to find his family. Now here was another man tearing realities apart for love. You have a girlfriend, Peter said. You should understand how I feel. Xiao Ran pointed at the heads. What about these? What are they for? Peter plucked one from the tank and held it up. They're anchors. When a ship docks, it drops an anchor. If I want to land precisely in a specific universe, I need anchors. These give my machine fixed points to home in on. It clicked. Peter had fixed his travel device and no longer wanted to rely on blind jumps. A universe that had a Spider-Man was likely to have an MJ too. By hauling Spider-Men from other worlds into this one, he could use them as anchors to zero in on a universe where MJ existed. The only question was whether that MJ would be the one he was searching for. Chapter 150. Clearly, the MJ in this universe wasn't the one he was looking for. One question, Xiao Ran said, holding up a finger. Since you can summon Spider-Man from other universes, why don't you just summon MJ directly? That won't work, Peter shook his head. MJ's just an ordinary person. If I summoned her, it would kill her. There was such a thing? Xiao Ran didn't get it. A machine that can travel between parallel universes looked like cutting-edge tech. How could summoning someone from another world be fatal? All right, I'm done asking, Xiao Ran said. Can I leave now? Sure. Peter nodded, and Xiao Ran extended his hand. Have a safe trip. Thanks. Peter reached out and shook Xiao Ran's hand. Ding. Do you want to extract the character entry for target character Peter Parker? It is detected that target character Peter Parker has multiple character entries. Please select one for extraction. A list unfurled before Xiao Ran's eyes. You can travel through time and move between parallel universes. The multiverse holds no secrets for you. World destroying. You have personally destroyed at least 10 worlds. Liar. You are very good at lying. Lying is as easy as breathing for you. Super genius. You are a born scientist. You often come up with special inspirations unintentionally. You are crazy for love. You can do anything to pursue true love, even destroy the world. P.S. The fourth update is here. Chapter 108, the most expensive sorry in history. Clearance departure. Take away the giant mech. Good heavens. This guy actually has 5 character entries. Xiao Ran stared at the system prompt in surprise. He had never seen anything like this. The prestige was over the top. According to the World Destroyer Demon King entry, this Peter had already destroyed at least 10 worlds. What kind of Demon King Peter was this? Why destroy so many worlds? Xiao Ran thought incredulously. What a dumb idea. Just go find MJ. Why annihilate universes? And the liar entry meant not a word out of Peter's mouth could be trusted. Is something wrong? Peter asked, noticing Xiao Ran's sudden frown. Nothing. Xiao Ran shook his head, then tapped the screen. System, extract the time traveler entry. Ding! Extraction successful. Relieved, Xiao Ran let go of Peter's hand. Peter did the same and secretly breathed out. He didn't know that if he left this world with the time machine, the entire planet would collapse the moment he left. He certainly wasn't going to tell Xiao Ran that. Lying and deceiving had become second nature to him. Even the best psychologists couldn't always tell when he lied. Wait! Xiao Ran called out just as Peter turned to leave. Peter froze and turned back. What is it? I've never seen time travel before. I'm coming with you, Xiao Ran said, slinging an arm around Peter's shoulder. Peter could refuse, but he didn't want to make a scene. All right, he said reluctantly. But don't touch anything. I finally fixed that machine. Don't worry, I might not have many virtues, but keeping my word is one of them, Xiao Ran said, patting his chest. Peter chose to believe him. Half an hour later, they arrived at an unremarkable house. Peter produced a string of keys and opened the door. Inside, the house was empty. Peter placed his palm against a wall, and the wall slid open to reveal a hidden door and an elevator. Come on, Peter said, stepping in first. They rode down and the elevator stopped. When the doors opened, they stepped into a huge white chamber, over 300 square meters with no partitions. In the center sat a circular machine, a bloated flying saucer shape with a transparent dome so the interior could be seen. "This is my time machine," Peter said. "I call it MJ1. Xiao Ran's expression said everything. He thought, "Love brain, tone it down." Peter produced a small device and took out what he called Spider Peter's brain. Holding it reverently, he opened a recess in the back of the machine and slid the brain inside. "This lets me lock the spatiotemporal coordinates of the target universe," he explained. "I see." Xiao Ran walked over and lightly tapped the machine's surface. "Hey, be gentle," Peter cried. "I didn't hit it hard," Xiao Ran said. "What's this made of? It feels tough." "It's MJ super alloy," Peter said, running his hand over the hull like he was stroking a lover's cheek, his voice full of affection. Xiao Ran was speechless. This lovesick man's whole life was MJ. He'd named the alloy after her. If he ever found MJ and she turned out to be married with kids, he'd probably implode. The thought made Xiao Ran oddly curious, though he told himself it wasn't his business. On impulse, Xiao Ran slapped the machine. Bang! A thunderous crack rang out. A large section of the machine's outer shell caved in instantly. The so-called MJ superalloy splintered with a web of fractures. Chapter 151, Section 151. Xiao Ran was a little surprised. This thing was really sturdy. He had just used nearly 10 million tons of force, and it only cracked. That MJ superalloy was something else. "What are you doing?" Peter shouted, staring in shock and fury. "My apologies, I'll fix it right away," Xiao Ran said. Then, a second later, he unleashed heat vision at temperatures of tens of millions of degrees from his eyes, slicing clean through the machine and cutting it in half. "My apologies, I seem to have accidentally broken it," he added with an innocent expression. Peter went rigid, then his eyes flashed red. "Ah! I'm gonna kill you! I'm gonna kill you!" He charged madly at Xiao Ran, but Xiao Ran waved a hand and sent him flying. Boom! Peter slammed into the 10-meter-thick reinforced concrete wall, punching a huge hole almost all the way through. Xiao Ran lightly hooked a finger. Peter, embedded in the wall, was yanked free and suddenly hung in midair as if pinned. "This armor of yours is good quality," Xiao Ran observed. With a grab, the plating peeled off Peter's body. As Xiao Ran spread his fingers, the armor disassembled into tiny components and scattered into a pile at his feet. "Why?" Peter roared. "I just wanted to find my MJ. Why can't you grant me this small request?" Xiao Ran circled him calmly. "If I'm not mistaken, when you leave a universe, something bad happens here immediately, right?" Peter's face froze. Then he snapped, "I don't know what you're talking about. You unprincipled, untrustworthy." His voice cut off. The lying defense came naturally to him, but it didn't fool Xiao Ran. "Okay," Xiao Ran said, "then let me see for myself." Peter struggled, but it was useless. One of Xiao Ran's hands passed through Peter's skull, and his fingers closed around something inside. A torrent of memories smashed into Peter's mind. He gasped no and tried to resist, but Xiao Ran kept going. Xiao Ran watched the visions unfold. He saw Peter travel from universe to universe. Every time he left, the Earth in that universe detonated in a spectacular bloom, like cosmic fireworks. More than a dozen worlds had been erased in the same way. He had destroyed over a dozen Earths. Then the memories rewound to Peter's original life. Years locked in a lab, a man who looked not even 20 but was over 40. 16 years devoted to building a time machine, MJ1. The first world he destroyed was the Earth he was born on. In another memory, MJ lay in a pool of blood. Peter cradled her and wept. MJ was a black woman with fluffy, curly hair, slightly taller than Peter. Xiao Ran thought of the Spider-Man movies. Was this the MJ of that timeline? The sacred timeline, Earth 199999? He saw two identical Spider-Men at one point, one a cunning scoundrel, the other a demon king figure who had wiped out worlds for the sake of love. They weren't the movie's original Spider-Man. These were warped, extreme versions. The memory moved on. Peter and MJ had argued about his work. In frustration, he'd said, "If you want to leave, then leave." MJ walked out and was struck by a car and killed. Peter believed he was responsible, and the rest of his life became an obsession. To find MJ, to tell her he was sorry. Xiao Ran listened without sympathy. An apology worth hundreds of billions of lives, the thought was almost laughable. Brilliant and stubborn at once. If Peter had never invented time travel, maybe he'd have grieved and moved on. But he had made the machine, and everything had gone to madness. When the last memory faded, Peter was crying openly. "I must personally say I'm sorry to MJ. I failed her. I hurt her," he sobbed. "When you die and go to hell," Xiao Ran said coldly, "maybe you'll see your MJ there, and you can tell her then." He gave Peter no chance to argue. With a sudden motion, he closed his hand, and Peter detonated in a spray of blood and bone. Before he died, Peter had wanted to insist MJ wouldn't be in hell. He didn't get the chance. Maybe in whatever came next, he could scheme his way into leading demons to war against heaven. But that was no longer Xiao Ran's concern. With Peter gone, 2 item extraction opportunities were credited to Xiao Ran. Those were routine. What mattered was that this time, there was no notification forcing him back in 24 hours. The American comic world had concluded its plotline. The world was now fully open to Xiao Ran. He could return whenever he liked. For the people of that world, no matter how long he was away, it would be only one night. "It's finally resolved," Xiao Ran said, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The outcome had exceeded his expectations in a grotesque way. Destroying over a dozen worlds for the sake of an apology, it was tragic, absurd, and in the end, over. Leaving this thing here would only be a disaster. It's better to destroy it completely. Xiao Ran eyed the MJ1 unit at his feet, the machine already split in 2. With a single motion, he scooped it up, punched through the ground, blew the house above into splinters, and finally blasted out of the atmosphere. The sun gleamed ahead, throwing off unbearable light and heat. Xiao Ran pushed his speed to the limit, racing toward it at over 1,000 kilometers per second. When he reached the halves of the mech, he shoved them hard. The 2 pieces sliced through the void, hurtling toward the sun at nearly 2,000 kilometers per second. At that velocity, they would reach the sun in about 21 minutes, but the sun's gravity would accelerate them further, shortening the fall. In reality, it might take only a little over 10 minutes. Once the wreckage was on its way, Xiao Ran turned and returned to Earth. His task was done. The next day, he met Superman Peter again. "Are you sure you're not leaving?" Xiao Ran asked. "Not for now." Peter looked at the ruined city in the distance, where cleanup crews were still at work. "I have to take responsibility for what happened. I'm going to stay here a while and try to make up for the damage I caused." "All right, if you've decided, do as you wish." Xiao Ran nodded. "If you ever want to go back, come find me. You know where I am." Peter nodded and glanced toward the giant mech still parked on the coast. "What are you planning to do with that thing?" "I'll send it somewhere no one can find," Xiao Ran said. "That's for the best. This world isn't ready for such weapons." Peter agreed. If Xiao Ran hadn't taken control, he would have sent it into space himself. When Peter woke up in a private hospital room, laughter came from the next room over. He turned his head with effort and saw Harry, wrapped in bandages like a mummy, chatting with Mary Jane in a floral dress. They were laughing together. The atmosphere was warm and easy. "Peter, you're awake." Mary Jane rushed over and grabbed his hand. "Thank God. I'm so glad you're okay." Peter blinked and looked at Harry in the other bed. "How did I? How are you still alive?" Harry grinned. "We were lucky, far enough away to survive. But you can see from me, I'll be here a while." Harry winked at Peter. Mary Jane sat for a while, then answered a phone call and left. With Mary Jane gone, Harry's expression grew serious. "Peter, are we still good brothers?" "Of course," Peter said. "Then don't join any evil organizations again, or I'll have to arrest you for real," Harry said, half joking, half earnest. Peter promised he wouldn't. "I'm tired. I'm going to sleep for a bit." After a moment, Peter added, "Me too," and lay back down, closing his eyes. As his eyelids shut, something black slithered up his neck, an oily, living substance that crept and writhed. In the Zongman world, in the second-floor bedroom of the villa in Mihua Town, Xiao Ran opened his eyes. It was 6 in the morning. He washed, changed into his school uniform, and headed downstairs. In the courtyard, Mitsuri had already been up for some time, practicing sword techniques. She stowed her Nichiren blade when he opened the sliding door and ran over, smiling. "Are we going to eat now?" she asked, eyes bright. "Yep, wait for me. I'm going to wash my face," Xiao Ran said. On the little food street, Mitsuri carried bag after bag, greeting the shopkeepers like an old friend. In just a few days, she had clearly become well known here. Xiao Ran watched, amused, and when she flashed a squinty, delighted grin, he couldn't help but reach out and pinch her cheek. She blushed and hurried on. At a shop entrance, they waited for takoyaki. A familiar voice made Xiao Ran turn his head. Shishigami Hiro, backpack slung over one shoulder and looking effortlessly cool, handed a bill to a shop owner and took a wrapped package. As he started to leave, he spotted Xiao Ran, nodded with mild curiosity, and walked on. Xiao Ran glanced where Hiro had gone and saw a timid-looking boy waiting, Ando Naoyuki. The two met and walked off together toward the intersection, chatting. "Mitsuri, I'm ready," she announced, taking an enormous bag from the proprietress. "How much?" she asked. "The total is 11,070 yen. Let's make it 11,000, the shop owner said with a beaming smile. Xiao Ran looked at the bulging bag in Mitsuri's hands. It was packed to the brim. With Mitsuri's appetite, feeding her was expensive. Just her breakfasts alone ran over 20,000 yen a day in his estimate. Over a month, that would be more than 600,000 yen, far above the salary of many office workers. But it was nothing to Xiao Ran. He shrugged inwardly and handed over the payment. After paying, Xiao Ran escorted Mitsuri home. Later, during his noon break, he went to check on the giant mech he'd brought back from the Spider-Man world to the Zongman world. This was the item he'd chosen to import. He'd asked the system in advance whether objects he pulled out could appear beside him or be placed inside the Infinity Castle. That option hadn't been available until he gained control of the castle and became its master. Now, he could place things in the castle's interior at will. The castle's internal space was as big as a town. Even if he wanted to move entire mountains of gold from the American comic world, it wouldn't collapse the house or anything. There was more than enough room. What he still hadn't mastered, however, was piloting the mech. Taking advantage of his break, he slipped in to study it. First, he tried the cockpit. He found the switch that should open it, but no matter how he pulled, it wouldn't budge unless he forced it. Something he didn't want to do and risk breaking the machine. Instead, he went around the exterior and entered the cockpit area directly, planning to see whether it had its own AI that simply didn't recognize him as its master. After about an hour of fiddling, Xiao Ran managed to open the cockpit door. Inside was a pod that looked like a hibernation chamber. He tested it. Anyone who lay in the pod and donned the built-in helmet could control the mech with their mind. Once activated, the cockpit's interior view vanished and was replaced by what the mech saw from its head. He took the mech for a short walk in the open space he'd reserved in the castle. Its heavy, long legs moved a few steps with a surprisingly smooth gait, far from sluggish. "Not bad," he muttered. "A big toy." He hadn't brought the mech back for fighting. He simply liked it. He named it Time Traveler to commemorate its journeys across different universes. Whatever its original designation had been, he guessed something like MJ Na. It didn't matter. Time Traveler stood 137 meters tall. The chest housed a cold fusion reactor that produced massive, clean energy to power the machine. Its main chest cannon could penetrate hundreds of kilometers into the Earth and obliterate a mountain. Even Xiao Ran, if struck directly, would suffer some injuries from it. Considering that his own defenses could shrug off the equivalent of a 300 million-ton nuclear blast with only minor damage, that said something about the cannon's destructive power, arguably more terrifying than a conventional nuclear explosion. There were two shoulder-mounted secondary cannons that were less powerful than the main gun, but could recharge in 1 second and consumed far less energy. Two blades were hidden in the forearm sections. The mech's frame was built entirely from MJ superalloy, a material whose quality Xiao Ran had already tested. Peter Parker's time travel machine had been made from the same alloy. When Xiao Ran struck it with a force of 10 million tons, it only dented and tore in a few places. The strength of the alloy was astonishing. The arm blades would be lethal against large targets, but comically excessive against small ones, like using a cannon to swat a mosquito. Beyond its weaponry, the mech itself was a weapon, built of super alloy and weighing a staggering 5,400 tons. Even a casual kick would cause catastrophic destruction. Around 7 p.m., Xiao Ran and Mitsuri entered a private room at a high-end restaurant. The waiter opened the door as they arrived. "Excuse me for the interruption," the waiter announced politely to the diners inside. "Hello, guests. Your friends have arrived." "Okay, thank you. You may serve the dishes," said Yoko Okino from inside the room. The staff at venues like this were trained not to make a fuss over celebrities, so the waiter didn't scream or ask for an autograph. The waiter closed the sliding door and left. Xiao Ran led Mitsuri to the table. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" the woman opposite asked. Xiao Ran took in her appearance, a red, hip-hugging dress, classic wavy long hair, and a mature, big sister aura, still very beautiful. Ikezawa Yuko looked the part, but in Neon's entertainment industry, beauty alone didn't guarantee work. Connections were everything, unless you were planning to go into adult films, where looks and figure mattered most. "This is Miss Ikezawa Yuko," Yoko introduced. "Miss Yuko, this is my boss, Mr. Xiao Ran." "Hello, President." Ikezawa Yuko immediately performed a respectful dojiza, bowing deeply. "Miss Yuko wants to sign with our company?" Xiao Ran asked. "Yes, please save me, President," Yuko said, almost pleading. Xiao Ran waved a hand. "It's not that serious." In truth, Yuko's situation was similar to Yoko Okino's. Yoko had been put on hiatus after her relationship with Fuji Akiyoshi was exposed, and rumors spread that she had driven him to his death. She'd been sidelined by her company and then poached by Xiao Ran. Ikezawa Yuko had been exposed for trespassing and scheming against Yoko. With far fewer fans to begin with, she'd been ruined much faster. Yuko's company hadn't completely frozen her out the way they had Yoko, but practically speaking, she couldn't get jobs anymore. Her endorsements were canceled over the image hit, and she'd been forced to pay breach of contract fees that wiped out nearly all her savings. So when Yoko approached her and offered to help her leave her current agency and join Yoko's company, Yuko accepted without hesitation. If it had been any other management firm, she might have thought it over. But Yoko, who was at the center of the incident that ruined her, was the one offering help. She didn't hesitate. The reason Yuko suffered in the first place was largely because of the public reaction to Yoko's scandal. When Yoko was put on hiatus, many of Yoko's fans unfollowed and vented their anger online. They couldn't attack the big company, so they attacked Ikezawa Yuko instead. Yuko's own actions had already alienated many casual fans, and then the onslaught from Yoko's loyal supporters silenced the rest. By the time Yoko reached out, Yuko had almost no defenders left. But if Yoko Okino were to step forward now and say she had already forgiven Ikezawa Yuko, that they even worked for the same company, Yoko's most devoted fans would stop harassing her alone. It wouldn't win back all the fans she'd lost, but it would at least stop things from getting worse. With some effort, maybe she could even reclaim a few. So, Ikezawa Yuko grasped the opportunity without hesitation. "It may not be a big deal to you, Mr. President," she said earnestly, "but to me, this is a matter of life and death. Please, let me join your company." Xiao Ran glanced at Yoko, who gave a slight nod. He smiled, helped Ikezawa Yuko to her feet, and extended his hand. "If you're that sincere, Miss Yuko, welcome to our company." Ikezawa Yuko seized his hand, shook it firmly, and vowed repeatedly that she would work hard and create value for the firm. Xiao Ran exchanged a few polite words in reply. The food arrived then. Mitsuri, who had been starving, brightened immediately. "Come on, everyone, let's eat," she said, and plunged a large mouthful of beef into the hot pot. When it was cooked, she dipped it in sauce and stuffed it into her mouth, cheeks puffed with pleasure. "Delicious." Xiao Ran chuckled at the sight of the little glutton and handed her a napkin to wipe her mouth. "Eat slowly. No one's going to take it from you." "I'm hungry," Mitsuri said, rubbing her belly, then picked up 2 thick slices of grilled beef tongue, dipped them in sauce, and ate them with relish. Watching Mitsuri eat so freely, Ikezawa Yuko felt a stab of envy. Mitsuri clearly had a close, easy rapport with President Xiao. She was unself-conscious and didn't care about keeping up appearances. If only Yuko had that kind of backing, life in show business would be so much easier. She had never had that kind of opportunity before, and she'd been arrogant enough to scorn ordinary businessmen. After losing everything, she'd learned a hard truth. In the entertainment industry, you needed a backer. Talent and beauty weren't always enough. If she'd had someone powerful on her side, she might never have been sidelined. So she threw herself into the role. During the meal, she hovered over Xiao Ran, constantly serving him food and pouring his drink, fawning in a way meant to secure his favor. Yoko Okino saw through the act instantly, but she said nothing. She had given up any hopes of becoming Xiao Ran's main partner after he introduced Sonoko to her, who in their right mind would give up the second daughter of the Suzuki Financial Group for a minor celebrity. Better, she decided, to run the company well. She still owned 10%, and when the company profited, she profited. After being sidelined, Yoko had also learned a lesson. Nothing was more important than real money, the kind that actually landed in your account. So when Ikezawa Yuko busied herself around Xiao Ran, Yoko felt no jealousy. Around 9 o'clock, they left the restaurant and hailed 2 taxis at the curb. "Mitsuri, take Miss Yoko back. Be careful on the way," Xiao Ran told Mitsuri, who had not had a drop to drink. Mitsuri nodded, then glanced at Ikezawa Yuko, who was leaning heavily on Xiao Ran and pretending to be drunk. A look of disdain crossed Mitsuri's face. The performance was obvious. She was sure Xiao Ran had seen it too, but he hadn't exposed her. He was escorting the woman home himself. Mitsuri rolled her eyes at Xiao Ran as she climbed into the taxi and left. In the other cab, Xiao Ran gave Ikezawa Yuko's address. She lay against him as if asleep, her act convincing enough for the casual observer. Tsk. Who said Ikezawa Yuko could not act? Soon they pulled up outside a modest apartment building. After Xiao Ran paid the fare, he helped Ikezawa Yuko out of the taxi. "Miss Yuko, which floor is your place on?" he asked in the elevator lobby. 10th, 12th floor, she slurred. The elevator arrived, and he helped her inside, pressing the button for 12. As the car ascended, Ikezawa Yuko gradually seemed to wake. Where are we?" she mumbled. "In the elevator to your home. We'll be there soon," Xiao Ran replied. "Oh, how troublesome of you, Mr. President, to escort me personally," she said, lifting her head. Her cheeks were flushed and her gaze unfocused. In terms of looks, she was no worse than Yoko Okino, just a different type, and Xiao Ran thought he might be up late that night. The elevator dinged at the 12th floor. "Can you walk on your own, Miss Yuko?" he asked. She swayed, tried to stand, and promptly collapsed back into his arms. "Sorry, I can't seem to walk," she mumbled, embarrassed. "That's fine, I'll help you in," Xiao Ran said. No one present was naive. They all understood the little performance. He supported her to the front door, took a key from her bag, and opened the apartment for her. Chapter 155, Section 155. The apartment was small, only about 60 square meters. A modest living room, a little-used kitchen, 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom, and a tiny balcony. That was all Ikezawa Yuko had. It wasn't even as big as Xiao Ran's living room. "Sit down for a bit. I'm going to take a shower," she said as she came in. She pushed Xiao Ran gently in the chest, letting him sit on the couch, then swayed her hips and went into the bedroom. "If you want something to drink, it's in the fridge," she added, holding her pajamas and giving him a flirtatious look before heading into the bathroom. The door clicked shut, then sprang back open and stayed ajar. Xiao Ran got up and grabbed a bottle of cola from the fridge. He drank a long, satisfying gulp, set the half-empty bottle down, and glanced toward the bathroom. He had no other motive. He really just wanted to take a shower. It was already past 2 in the morning. Later, Xiao Ran lay on the bed and watched Ikezawa Yuko sleeping beside him, a strange feeling stirring inside. Yoko Okino had looked like a young girl, but had been seasoned in relationships, a sort of faux innocence. Ikezawa Yuko, on the other hand, looked like a glamorous older sister and was, in every way, genuinely feminine. You really couldn't judge a book by its cover. Thinking that over, Xiao Ran pulled Yuko into an embrace and fell asleep. The next morning at 6, Xiao Ran woke on schedule. After falling asleep the previous night, he hadn't entered a new American comic world. Instead, he spent 2 days in the Spider-Man world that had been permanently fixed. He'd visited Peter and Harry in the hospital. Both were recovering well. One thing had surprised him. After Venom Spider's apparent death, Xiao Ran assumed Venom had disappeared too. Venom was vulnerable to fire and sound waves, and had taken heavy damage in that battle. But Xiao Ran had spotted Venom on Peter. Peter was concealing it tightly, but it was there. Had Harry become Spider-Man and Peter become Venom Spider? Would the two brothers continue to be entangled in rivalry and resentment? Xiao Ran had no interest in interfering. He'd let them work it out themselves. Over those 2 days in the Spider-Man world, Xiao Ran had spent most of his time sunbathing in space, almost 30 hours total, and his power had increased a little. Around 7, after breakfast Yuko had prepared, he left for school. "I'll talk to Yoko at the company and make sure some resources are directed to you," he told Ikazawa Yuko at the door. She watched him go, a happy, almost wifely look on her face. "Yes, President. Please take care," she said with a sweet smile. That was exactly what she wanted. She'd been naive once, but she'd grown up and learned what she wanted, and she wasn't at a disadvantage. She had even gained something. Xiao Ran nodded and headed for the elevator. His relationship with Ikazawa Yuko was similar to the one he had with Yoko Okino. Both were shrewd women who knew their place. As long as they stayed reasonable, he wouldn't treat them unfairly. Material things meant nothing to him. In Class 2B at Taitan High, Xiao Ran changed his shoes and took his seat. Sonoko slipped up behind him, looping an arm around his neck. "Xiao Ran, have you heard?" she whispered. "What?" he asked. "A new transfer student just came into Class A. Guess who it is?" "A new transfer?" Xiao Ran remembered the Rolls-Royce he'd seen at the school gate. He glanced in the direction of Class A, but through the wall all he could see were vague shapes. "I can't guess. Just tell me." "Boring. No imagination," Sonoko teased, then revealed the name. "It's Snow Below Yukino, second daughter of the Snow Below family." "Snow Below Yukino?" Xiao Ran repeated. Sonoko filled him in. She'd transferred from Sobu High in Chiba City and was rumored to be an icy beauty. Xiao Ran smirked. "If she's that cold, she might be worth getting to know." Sonoko playfully tapped him, pretending to scold. "I heard someone didn't go home last night," Xiao Ran defended himself. "I was recruiting new people for my company." Sonoko rolled her eyes. Nobody believed that excuse. At noon, on his way down the third-floor corridor after lunch, Xiao Ran passed a girl coming out of Class A. She had long, lustrous black hair, a delicate, almost glowing face, pale skin, and a cool, distant expression that made her seem untouchable. She glanced at him with a careful, assessing look, but neither spoke. They simply passed. Snow Below Yukino. He recognized her. In a school like Taitan, her looks alone would make her stand out, and her childlike figure only made her more memorable. Xiao Ran wondered aloud why so many people were transferring into this school lately. After the afternoon classes finished, Xiao Ran grabbed his backpack and met up with Sonoko and Ran. The three of them were joined by Miko and Xiao Hua from Class C. They'd agreed to try a newly opened cake shop. Miko and Xiao Hua were already waiting at the classroom door. "Everyone's here, let's go," Xiao Hua urged. Xiao Ran walked ahead with the four girls trailing behind, chatting about typical girl things while he stayed on the sidelines. At the school gate, they saw the new transfer student climbing into a Rolls-Royce. The car eased away, drawing little attention. The Rolls-Royce didn't faze students at Taitan. "Did you see her? That's Snow Below Yukino, the transfer," Sonoko pointed out. Chapter 156. Sonoko leaned toward Miko and whispered while standing beside her. Xiao Ran had the strange impression she was talking about him. "Is she the new transfer student?" Miko nodded. She and Xiao Hua had only recently transferred. "Should we go say hello tomorrow? She doesn't seem to have made any friends yet." Miko was naturally kind. Though her face sometimes looked blank out of habit, she was gentle at heart. "Okay, I agree." Ran was the first to raise her hand. She liked helping new classmates settle in. "Then let's all go together." Sonoko smiled, then looked at Xiao Ran. "Xiao Ran, are you coming with us tomorrow?" "No, you guys go ahead." Xiao Ran shook his head. He didn't dislike Snow Below Yukino, but he wasn't eager to introduce himself right away. "All right, then the four of us will go." 6 p.m. Xiao Ran called Mitsuri, and the six of them went out to dinner. They broke up and headed home around 8. "See you tomorrow, Xiao Hua." See you tomorrow." Yotsuya residence, Miko waved goodbye to Xiao Hua and turned for home. "I'm home." Bai Hechuan Hua, Xiao Hua, whose place was nearby, skipped along happily. After a few minutes, she suddenly stopped and rubbed her stomach. "I'm so hungry." She'd just eaten, but already felt ravenous. Simple-minded Xiao Hua didn't think anything strange of it. She dug through her pockets, found some coins, and walked toward a vending machine at the side of the street to buy something. Xiao Ran's home. As soon as Xiao Ran and Mitsuri stepped inside their house, he He felt it, a presence, and looked toward the direction of the street. He took a talisman from his pocket, the one he'd found inside a teru teru bozu at Miko's house. The writing on it had blurred as if it had gotten wet. "Something's wrong," Mitsuri said when she saw his face. "Xiao Ran?" "A very strong malevolence in that direction," he told her, then asked, "Do you want to go see?" Mitsuri nodded. "Yeah, let's go. Something might be happening." They changed shoes and went back out. The residential road, lit only by streetlights, was unnervingly quiet. Even the usual neighborhood cats and dogs were silent. Under a streetlight, Xiaohua had bought 3 pieces of bread from the vending machine and started eating them on the spot. She was starving. The bread disappeared quickly, but instead of feeling satisfied, she felt even hungrier than before. "What's going on? Am I just extra hungry today?" She didn't realize anything was wrong. Today her appetite was off the charts. She'd eaten nearly twice her normal daily amount and still felt faint from hunger. She patted her skirt pocket, searched, then sighed. Her coins were gone. "Forget it. I'll go home. There's food in the fridge." She glanced back at the vending machine, then hurried toward home. Another street, a shimmering portal, opened on the road ahead, and Xiao Ran stepped through with Mitsuri. The 6 Great Demon King's technique let him smell pure malevolence in the air. The scent was foul, unmistakable. "It should be here," Xiao Ran said, "but it seems like they're not right here anymore." Mitsuri couldn't see spirits clearly, but her senses picked up a presence if there were enough of them. This time she didn't get that feeling. "They've already moved. Follow me." Xiao Ran led the way. After a minute, their eyes fell on a lit vending machine. Empty snack wrappers cluttered the trash can nearby. A little further on, a familiar figure crouched under a streetlight. Mitsuri's steps stopped. Her face tightened. Such a terrifying aura," she whispered, cold sweat beading on her forehead. She instinctively rested one hand on her Nichiren blade. They weren't at the gathering earlier. How did so many gather all of a sudden? Xiao Ran's gaze scanned Xiaohua and the dark shapes floating around her. The figures varied in size, some as big as elephants, others only half a head shorter than Xiaohua. They were all ghosts, 20-30 of them, drawn to Xiaohua by her unusual constitution. "Let's go take a look," Xiao Ran said. They walked over. Xiaohua swayed under the streetlight, dizzy and near fainting. "Xiaohua?" Hearing Xiao Ran's voice, she looked up and grabbed his arm weakly. I'm so hungry. Do you have anything to eat?" Xiao Ran reached into his infinity castle and pulled out a bag of potato chips. He tore it open and handed it to her. He kept all sorts of things in that pocket dimension: clothes, food, even a bicycle. What had once been Kibutsuji Muzan's lair had become Xiao Ran's storehouse. Xiaohua's eyes lit up. She snatched the chips and shoveled them into her mouth. Her reckless eating even made Mitsuri avert her gaze. "Slow down." Xiao Ran produced a box of cake and a bottle of water and set them down. Xiaohua, grateful, dove into the cake, not bothering with manners. Cake was more filling. After the box, she began to regain color and steadiness. "Thank you, Xiao Ran," she said, swallowing. "It's nothing. If it's not enough, I have more." He placed more food before her, and while Xiaohua ate, he watched the surrounding ghosts. One large specter turned its head and fixed him with those swirling, tormented eyes full of pain and madness that would freeze an ordinary person in place. Xiao Ran reached out. Wisps of malevolence gathered to his palm like smoke. Chapter 157, Section 157. The large ghost struggled to break free, but in the end, Xiao Ran devoured it, and it condensed into a tiny black bead. Such pure malevolence, Xiao Ran thought. This was even purer than the tentacle ghost he'd encountered at Miko's house last time. Among these evil spirits, this one was unusually strong. He continued his work, devouring the other spirits. The black bead in his hand swelled to more than 5 times its original size. Only when every spirit around Xiaohua had been consumed did he absorb the bead itself, which was entirely formed from concentrated malevolence. Feeling a slight increase in his power, he didn't linger on it. He looked up and scanned the city. Tonight, Tokyo felt unusually active. He could sense over a dozen places emitting dense malevolence. It wasn't just around Xiaohua. Some other spots were even stronger. "Lord Xiao Ran, is everything settled here?" Mitsuri asked, visibly relieved. The stabbing sensation she'd had in her back was gone. Xiao Ran nodded. Seeing Xiaohua still crouched under the street lamp and eating ravenously, clearly not done anytime soon, he turned to Mitsuri. You stay with her and keep watch. I'll check the other locations. Understood, Lord Xiao Ran. Please be careful. Put yourself first. Mitsuri agreed earnestly. Don't worry, they're just a bunch of evil spirits, Xiao Ran said with a faint smile. Then his body rose, and with a whoosh, he flew off at subsonic speed toward the nearest source of intense malevolence. A few seconds later, he arrived at a park. It was late, well past 8, and empty of people, but full of ghosts. At least 100 evil spirits of various sizes had gathered. Xiao Ran descended into the park. Why were so many spirits gathered here? If spirits clustered around Xiaohua because of her special constitution, what was attracting them to a park? A geomantic treasure? He frowned. He noticed something near a metal climbing frame, crouched down, and brushed away the soil. Beneath the frame was a shallow pit containing a small black wooden box. He picked it up and opened it. Inside was a piece of paper with a familiar symbol. He took out the ink-stained paper from his pocket and compared them. The symbols matched. Someone deliberately buried this here. Why? He mused aloud. It's a ritual, a voice replied behind him. Xiao Ran stood and turned. A man in black clothes and pants, white hair, and a black eye mask stood a little distance away. He was tall, over 1.9 meters, but slender, not imposing. Satoru Gojo, Xiao Ran said, recognizing him immediately. Eh? You know me? That's not fair. I don't know you, Gojo replied in a somewhat sardonic tone, though he was reliable when it mattered. Xiao Ran, Taitan High School, 2nd year. Ah, a high school student. Were you drawn by these things? Xiao Ran asked. Gojo nodded toward the gathered spirits, which he could also see. The existence of these ghosts overlapped somewhat with cursed spirits. Ordinary people couldn't perceive them, for instance. What's the ritual you found? Xiao Ran asked. Gojo's expression darkened. It's the night parade of 100 demons. They're trying to reopen the gates of hell. He didn't sound overly alarmed, just matter of fact. Are you here to stop it? Xiao Ran asked. Gojo shook his head. No, I happened upon it. Other people handle this kind of thing. Xiao Ran understood there seemed to be a division of labor. Jujutsu sorcerers like Gojo dealt primarily with cursed spirits. Those were far more destructive than these mindless evil spirits. But their movement seems slow, Xiao Ran observed. Yes, manpower is limited, and this situation looks serious, Gojo said, glancing up at the sky with a small sigh. So, little brother, want to help? He looked at Xiao Ran expectantly. Xiao Ran simply reached out and grabbed a nearby spirit. In less than a second, he devoured its malevolence, leaving a tiny black bead in his palm. The purified essence of the spirit scattered like starlight. Gojo's face showed surprise. This is purification. You could say that, Xiao Ran replied. Then he lightly stamped his foot. A silent force spread over the park, and Gojo felt a unique fluctuation, something reminiscent of a jutsu sorcerer's domain, but not one. He'd known from the moment he saw Xiao Ran that the boy wasn't a jujutsu sorcerer. The eyes gave it away. This was a different, similar power. As the force enveloped the park, the gathered spirits howled in pain. Their malevolence poured from them like a breached dam, rushing toward Xiao Ran's hand. In the blink of an eye, every one of the over 100 spirits had their malevolence stripped away. The bead in Xiao Ran's palm had grown to larger than a ping-pong ball. He brought it to his face and inhaled sharply. The malevolence was instantly absorbed into him. Gojo watched curiously and only asked after it was done, You absorbed all that? Are you going to be all right? Xiao Ran shot back. Do you have a problem with me eating? Chapter 158, Section 158, Satoru Gojo understood. For the young man in front of him, that malevolent thought was nothing more than a snack. What an interesting ability, Gojo exclaimed. I'm heading to the next place. You coming? Xiao Ran asked. Gojo yawned, waved a hand, and said, I'm getting old. I'm going to sleep first. Little brother, if there's a next time, I'll treat you to a meal, Xiao Ran called after him. Before Xiao Ran could reply, Gojo blurred and vanished from sight. Was he really just here to observe? Xiao Ran wondered. It had been unexpected to run into Satoru Gojo tonight. From Gojo's words, it sounded as if he had joined some organization that assigned missions to powerful individuals according to their specialties. Those who hunted ghosts, handled ghost incidents, Those skilled with cursed spirits handled cursed incidents. Some sort of countermeasure division set up by the Neon government? Xiao Ran mused. He wasn't interested in joining any such group anyway. He liked being free and disdained rules. Even if Gojo had invited him, he probably would have refused. On the rooftop of a tall building, Gojo, who'd said he was going to sleep, reappeared. "Yo," he called, greeting the person there as he approached and stopped. "You're late." The other man glanced at him. "I met a very interesting young man on the way and got carried away," he said without apology. "You don't meet many people who interest you," Gojo replied. "Is he one of your juniors from the jujutsu circle?" "No," the man said. "He's very special, very strong." Gojo remembered the crushing, fatal sense of threat he'd felt from Xiao Ran and clicked his tongue. "Young people these days are truly something," he said with admiration. "Are you feeling old?" The man squinted. "Of course not. No way I can compare to you, senior." Gojo grinned. The other man smiled faintly and fell silent with him. Meanwhile, Xiao Ran moved through the city, parks, plazas, schools, even crowded shopping malls, and found talismans and hiding places everywhere. The variety was astonishing. He covered nearly a dozen sites before discovering the most extreme. A talisman had been placed on a mannequin in a packed mall. Imagine, on the first floor of that mall, amid the constant stream of shoppers, the entire area was actually caked with low-level evil spirits. Thankfully, people with yin-yang eyes like Miko were rare. If one of them wandered in, they'd be terrified. "I've cleared them all, but it doesn't seem to be doing any good," Xiao Ran muttered. He had just cleansed the final congregation point on a large bridge and flew up to overlook the city below. His gaze fell on Tokyo's widest, longest road. From the surface, it looked normal, endless cars and traffic. But in the invisible realm, where ordinary people couldn't see, countless malicious spirits floated above the vehicles. Their number wasn't in the thousands or tens of thousands. At a glance, Xiao Ran estimated hundreds of thousands, if not more. "Didn't Satoru Gojo say there were people assigned to deal with this?" he asked the heir. "Where are they?" He had cleared spirits all the way across the city, but hadn't seen anyone else doing similar cleansing work. The so-called specialists Gojo mentioned had not appeared at all. "Not very reliable," he complained. Then he looked toward where the spirits vanished, an overpass. From the top of that overpass, a torrent of evil spirits streamed upward, and at a certain point, invisible to ordinary eyes, simply disappeared. Xiao Ran's nose twitched. He smelled sulfur, a scent he knew well. "Hell's demons," he murmured. The scent was so familiar, he could detect it kilometers away. At the very top of the overpass, a phantom gate had formed in the sky. It was mirage-like. From this distance, it was barely visible, but as more evil spirits poured into it, the gate looked increasingly real. The blood-red portal bore countless writhing, wailing figures carved into its surface. Merely staring at it conjured an echo of endless suffering. "Gate of Hell?" Xiao Ran whispered. As someone who wielded the power of Shabak's 6 demon kings, he still didn't know much about hell. Seeing this gate unsettled him. Could it actually lead to the hell of this world? After returning from the Spider-Man world, Xiao Ran had once used his time traveler trait to try to sense other parallel universes, but he'd learned the Zongmen world did not have the usual concept of parallel universes. Instead, there were many strange extra-dimensional spaces. Most of those extra-dimensional spaces left him with a deeply bad feeling, as if stepping in would mean immediate mortal danger. He had avoided using his time traveler ability to explore them. It wasn't reluctance, it was caution. If he felt that danger with his current strength, whoever or whatever ruled those spaces could likely crush him without much effort. That realization had taught Xiao Ran how deep and bottomless the Zongmen world really was. Just when he thought he understood, reality slapped him back down. Yet looking at the Gate of Hell now, he did not feel the spine-tingling chill he associated with those other extra-dimensional spaces. There was no creeping dread, no skin-crawling cold. It felt different. Is it fake, he wondered. If it were a sham, then hell had lost its majesty. On the rooftop of a 20-story building, a group of cloaked figures watched the gate grow more tangible with excitement. "It's almost complete," someone breathed. "My God will return to the human world." An old man with a full white beard shouted, elation shaking his voice. In a quiet neighborhood, Kusuo Saiki paused through a manga chapter and looked out his window. Evil aura, he noted quietly, then shrugged. Too weak. Let someone else deal with it. A few streets away at the Kageyama residence, Shigeo Kageyama, mob, set down his pen while doing homework and peered out his second-floor window. Is there going to be a fight? Should I go watch? He hesitated. But my homework isn't finished. Maybe after I finish it. He put his head down and returned to his homework. The gate of hell was not as important as the teacher's assignment. Back on that rooftop with Gojo, the man in odd clothes and more than a dozen others stood looking toward the overpass. Given what's happening, are we sure we don't need to intervene? Someone in the group asked, uneasy. Satoru Gojo remained silent. This wasn't his responsibility to begin with. He'd only come to watch the fun. The man standing beside him, white-haired, slowly turned his narrow, squinting eyes toward the person who had just spoken behind him. Do you have a problem with my order? Strangely, though his tone sounded almost pleasant, the man being addressed was drenched in sweat, his face several shades paler than before. No, he stammered. The white-haired man stared at him for a few more seconds, then turned back and withdrew his gaze. Phew. The trembling man let out a sigh of relief, as if he'd survived a disaster. How stupid of him, knowing the captain's temper yet daring to question an order. If the captain had taken it badly, he wouldn't have died, but he would have been beaten senseless and forced to lie in bed for 10 days to half a month, besides being mocked by the rest of the team. Just the thought made his scalp tingle. High above, Xiao Ran hovered in the sky, looking down at the Hell Gate, which had now fully revealed its true form. Strange, with so many superpowered people in Tokyo, wasn't anyone stopping it? He'd already realized the talismans they'd planted around the city were mostly distractions, like criminal decoys in a crime movie, report minor incidents all over to exhaust the police, then strike when they were stretched thin. The pockets of evil spirits across Tokyo were the same trick. No wonder there were spirits everywhere, but the intended victims hadn't been taken in. Or perhaps they'd been interrupted by Xiao Ran's unexpected arrival. After all, he dealt with things easily on his own. If that was true, though, why had no one bothered to stop the Hellgate ritual until now? It felt as if they wanted it to succeed. A trap? The Hellgate itself also bothered him. Despite the display of power, it felt ordinary, almost low-grade. Compared to the other dimensional spaces Xiao Ran had sensed before, this one seemed inferior. Hell shouldn't be so unimpressive. That made him suspect this gate was fake. Since nobody else was intervening, Xiao Ran decided to wait and see what the conspirators were planning. A few minutes later, hundreds of thousands of evil spirits were swallowed by the gate. The gate, which had been tightly sealed, began to open slowly. Eyes turned toward it as an ominous aura pulsed from the other side. From inside, a pool of black blood oozed out and hung in the air. A hand emerged from the blood, then a head, a torso, and finally legs floated to the surface. The black fluid churned and congealed into a black tailcoat that settled onto the man's body. He stood over 1.9 meters tall, long-limbed and straight-backed. Long black hair fell casually around his pale face. A pair of blood-red eyes shone coldly. When he fully materialized, the hell gate behind him faded away. He glanced in one direction, and 3 pairs of black wings unfurled from his back. In an instant, he shot forward like a streak of black lightning. On the rooftop of a 20-story building, a dozen or so cloaked figures knelt with feverish excitement, chanting, "Hail, my God!" like religious zealots. Neither the 6-winged man nor his worshippers noticed Xiao Ran watching from above. Is he a fallen angel? 6 wings? Xiao Ran frowned. A 6-winged fallen angel with this level of presence? It felt far weaker than Clark had been when Xiao Ran first entered the Man of Steel world. This must be fake. Otherwise, a 6-winged fallen angel would be embarrassingly weak. The man with the arrogant, cold gaze addressed the kneeling group. "My name is Lucifer." Xiao Ran, speechless, internally scoffed. Confirmed fake, no doubt about it. "You? Lucifer? Don't disgrace the name." He'd seen enough Western shows where titles were grand, but the actual power was laughable. Still, the rooftop fanatics seemed to believe wholeheartedly, kowtowing and shouting, "Long live our God!" Long live? If this was really Lucifer, wasn't that borderline offensive? Xiao Ran glanced at his lifespan on his panel. After devouring Norman, His lifespan cap had already reached 5 million years. Long live, he mused. If that's the case, wouldn't I be 500 long lives? So I'm 500 Lucifers? He rolled his eyes. Lucifer didn't seem offended by their acclamations. He frowned slightly. Only a few of you remain? He asked, irritation showing. Reporting, my God. An old, gray-bearded man crawled forward a few steps, still on his knees. Ever since you were sealed by those despicable blasphemers, our followers have been hunted down. Those here now are all the living believers. A flash of disappointment passed over Lucifer's face. Never mind. Now that I have returned, from today on, you'll no longer have to hide. He spread his arms, and the 3 pairs of fallen wings unfurled as he spoke loudly. At that moment, shoot him, God! A cold voice came from behind Lucifer. A white light flashed, and Lucifer, who had just been grandstanding, looked down at his chest in astonishment. A knife had pierced him from the back, its tip protruding from the front. The blade retracted, splattering black blood. Lucifer swayed and then crashed onto the rooftop with a heavy thud. The dozen or so religious fanatics gaped, stunned. Their eyes were wide with disbelief as they stared at Lucifer lying motionless. God, killed? And so quickly? In the sky, a tall figure hovered. It was the man who had been standing with Satoru Gojo earlier. He held a short dagger, like a wakizashi, and smiled down at Lucifer's prone form. Stop pretending. Even a fake Lucifer wouldn't die that easily. Lucifer's body stirred. Slowly he sat up, dusted himself off, and glared up at the man in the air. You dead people again, he said coldly. Xiao Ran blinked, surprised. Jin Ichimaru? The voice, the smile, the slim blade, everything matched. The wakizashi was Shinso, Gin Ichimaru's Zanpakuto. To Xiao Ran's knowledge, Gin was captain of the 3rd Division in Soul Society. His Zanpakuto could thrust with incredible speed, and when he unleashed his Bankai, the instantaneous thrusts could reach phenomenal speeds. Legend even put them at hundreds of times the speed of sound, with an extreme effective range. Jin also had a curious and dangerous reputation, an undercover agent beside Aizen, an identity that had been his own secret. Why was a Soul Reaper out in the human world at all? Xiao Ran frowned. In the Bleach framework, the world was divided into 3 realms: the human world, Soul Society where Soul Reapers dwell, and Hueco Mundo, the Hollow Realm. Normally, Soul Reapers don't appear in the human world. Doing so is a violation of Seirete law. Only a few former captains or fugitives, like Kisuke Urahara Yori, had ever lived among humans while hiding their true identities. But Gin was out in the open, fighting, not hiding. That suggested the Seirete had sanctioned his presence. Perhaps the complex circumstances of this world, this Zongman world, had required it. Up in the air, Gin and fake Lucifer clashed. Hundreds of exchanges cut through the sky in an instant before they separated. Jin still wore that thin, unsettling smile. His eyes were narrow slits and the corners of his mouth twitched, pleased. Not bad, he said softly. For a fake Lucifer, he's got power. The smile never quite reached sincerity. Fake Lucifer flexed his ruined nails. Aware he didn't rely on weapons, his hands were his true instruments. Still, Soul Reaper's Zanpakuto were troublesome. His current body had limits. Against a Zanpakuto, he was inherently countered. Where physical blows would barely faze him, spiritual attacks and the sword's pressure cut deeper. Even though the squinty old man before him was weaker by himself, Lucifer hadn't had the upper hand so far. Your strength is great, Soul Reaper, fake Lucifer said, spreading 3 pairs of ragged wings. Hellfire flared around him, painting a monstrous silhouette across the night. But it's not nearly enough to finish me. Sometimes the wise choice is to retreat. Gin's smile didn't falter. As fake Lucifer unleashed his demonic display, Gin seemed to relax into the moment. It seems I've been underestimated, he murmured. On a distant rooftop, Satoru Gojo and a group of Soul Reapers watched the battle. The captain's getting serious, Izuru Kira remarked, a half-smile curving his mouth. Gojo tossed his hair back with a hand. Remember, this isn't a normal opponent, it's an artificial god. Even a second-stage awakened artificial god isn't something to take lightly. Kira nodded. Don't worry, Captain Gin knows what he's doing. A mere second-stage awakened artificial god shouldn't be able to stand against him. Gojo didn't argue. He'd seen Gin's true force before. Gin's spiritual pressure could be terrifying, even suppressing the reach of a domain at times. He was very much a captain in every sense. Xiao Ran watched from the sky with his hands in his pockets. Is he about to go Bankai? He wondered. So far, Gin had only used his Shikai. Xiao Ran was eager to see what his Bankai could do, if Shinso's legendary thrusts truly manifested against a being like fake Lucifer. From Xiao Ran's perspective, fake Lucifer's raw power wasn't extraordinary, maybe on the order of 500,000 tons of output, but his speed left much to be desired. That made him vulnerable to Shinso's instantaneous thrusts. Besides, Lucifer seemed more like an energy construct than a fleshy being. Spiritual pressure and a Zanpakuto's nature could disrupt him far more than blunt physical force. Pathetic, Xiao Ran said with a chuckle. He's countered on every front. His greatest strength doesn't even seem to work properly. Below, Jin raised Shinso, the sword now in its Bankai form, in one smooth motion. He whispered, soft and deliberate, Muto. In the next instant, there was a flash of white light.